Right, here we are again, and we're on my Ubuntu machine, and I've previously put in a nice little script, hopefully. So we'll look at that one, and we'll set up the permissions that are up for that to make sure that would run. So that's actually going to run my cloudify-composer. So that should all start up running out of here. We can see. I'm going to run that in the background, and then I'm going to echo this so it reminds me just really I need to go localhost and port 3000 to see that, but I don't really have a very good memory, so it's useful sometimes. So going to Cloudify, that's why tab's useful for that matter. So there we go, off it runs. We can see immediately after to Cloudify there's that line that we echoed, so just simply run that now using Firefox or some other suitable browser. So we've got a local host and port 3000. Login is composer. And then we can see this is starting up a blueprint. I want to start a new blueprint. So we'll discard those changes. Now having a look here, we've got a number of tabs that we can open up, and we'll have a look at some of these in action as we go through this. Starting with the Topology tab, and what we've got down here is this sort of Visio looking set of tiles, and we can then pick out of these when we want to start building up the nodes and the capabilities and the like, and the interfaces and all that sort of malarkey. There's no OpenStack mentioned here as yet. We're going to bring that in fairly quickly. We'll come back and look at inputs, outputs and the likes. Imports is where we're going to go, but we're going to source first, because what source does is it gives us the sort of Tosca file that we've got so far. Not a fat lot, because we haven't done anything. So there are no nodes as yet, or groups for that matter. But there is this import statement, which is against Cloudify. Now we're going to modify, well, we're going to add to that, and we're going to bring in OpenStack as well, so that'll allow us to have more things to play with down here as we build this up. Back to topology. So when we look at the topology, there's nothing there. So I want to go to imports first, I think, and see what we can do here. And what I want to do is I want to bring in, so we're using this sort of YAML file here from Cloudify as the types and everything, the available elements that we can deal with. So I want to add another one into here. Now to find that, I need to go off to a website. So the place that we're going to is this cloudify.co/plugins. And if we have a look down through here, what we can see is we've got the plugins for OpenStack. So if you right click and copy that link address and then go back to my virtual machine as it is and paste that in and save that, it takes a little while, it doesn't take too long. So we'll stay with it because it literally is, there it is. And we can see now we've got this in addition. But you go back to topology and you can see we've got some additional tiles to play with. So we'll start with these. We'll start off with the Cloudify OpenStack varieties. We can see we've got the nodes, and we've got the stuff down here dealing with floating IP addresses and security groups. So we'll come into server first, pop a server on there. Now anywhere in the white area, this box of the server, if we click on that, what should happen is we get this menu to the right hand side. First things first, let's change that server to the, call it host 1 for instance. There's only a single instance of it. We'll come back and change some of these other fields in just a moment. In fact, there's a mistake already. See, if you go and put the host value in here, host 1, assuming we can type correctly, you have to press return. Otherwise it doesn't take it. There's always those little featurettes, isn't there? Little foibles that things have. Right. Let's make that the web server. So let's go up to the other tiles, pick up web server and drop it in. What does that look like in the Tosca? So, well, actually, let's change its name first so we know what it is. I'm going to change that to my web server, and I'm going to make that just a single. There you go. See, missed it again. My web server. Press return. If you don't press return, it don't go. Press down 1, and the port number I'll leave at port 80. we could of course change that. So we've got a host and a web server. Looking in Tosca, what we actually see here is that we've got, under the node templates now, we've got the host and we've got my web server. We can see that that is indeed an OpenStack server. That's the host. And then the web server, we can see, has a relationship. And the relationship is that it's contained within host 1. Hey, excellent, because that's exactly what that picture is telling us. That my web server is actually hosted on host 1. Makes perfect sense. Right, let's have another server. Let's put a server over here and let's change its name so that this one is in fact, so remember, click in the white space up to the top and we'll change this to my database server. There you go, how's that? We've done it again. Must do that properly. My database. And I do find this a little bit annoying, to say the least. So there we go, in it goes. Now let's put in a database. So this is taking the tab out of here, database, dragging it across into the white space, up to the top, concentrate, and we'll have this down as my MongoDB. So that's essentially what I'm going to call it. I like a nice little lowercase there. Press return, did it this time. And again, a single instance, which is relevant. And this is where you see these numbers appearing now, just referencing the single instances in each of those. So it's starting to be iconized now. We can see that those servers sitting behind, those compute nodes, together with the web server's icon and the database. Great. So there's a relationship. Now if I come on the outside of that box and I click and then drag, and then I find another point on the other side here, there it is. Okay, now we've got a relationship. If I click on the middle of that, we'll see that opens up. That's called my connector 4, but we'll see the relationship here is it's connected from host 1 to my database. Now if we click in the white space of host 1, we find that as far as its relationship is concerned, the outgoing side we can see here is connected to, so you can see it's connected to my database server. And my database server, if I click in the white space of that, is on the incoming side, is connected to host 1. Fine, that's good. There's a relationship then between those two servers. Let's see that in Tosca. So as we come down, what we can see then is we've got host 1 and we've got its web server application, and then we've got my database and we've got the database deployment as well. So we can see that those two are in play. So we can see that the web server here, which is hosted on host 1, has a relationship. Remember, that's contained in host 1. But now we've got a new relationship, and this relationship is associated with the host, and that's saying it's connected to my database server. And we can see the same thing going on down here, where I've got my database server, and I can see what we have here is the fact that it's got its own database instance, and that instance is contained within my database. Fantastic. Good. So we're starting to build this sort of picture up bit by bit. Now if we open up the host 1 again, so left click inside that white space, we can see there's a number of properties here, including things like flavor and image. So these are the sorts of things that we can actually set. Now you can set it within there, or you can hit the edit on the left hand side, so you get this window that opens up. So either way should be acceptable. Now the thing is, of course, I need to know what the flavors are that are available to me. So if I go and look at my OpenStack deployment, I should be able to work with that. So if we go back and we have a look at the OpenStack tab and we go into the admin, my administrator, I can see I've got a number of flavors and a number of images. So if I look at the flavors in particular first, these IDs here are the flavors that we're going to refer to. So I've got a nice sort of MIC 10G with that's a 10 gigabyte storage space, 1 virtual CPU and 2 gigs of RAM. Excellent. Okay. So I'll take that as an image. So right click and copy that, of course, and then we'll go back in to our virtual machine. So within here now, I can actually paste that into there as the actual flavor that I want to use. And then furthermore, going back to that particular window, we can actually pick up instead the images. So tab onto images. Let's pick this is a new one I put in. This is a trusty AMD 64. Gives you an idea of what it is. And there's its ID. So if I copy that ID and take that across into the virtual machine again, then I can paste that in as the image. Okay, so that's now set. So come out of there. If you're not sure, just go back in, and you can see it's taken those settings quite happily. Okay, so the only other thing that you'll probably want to set in here is at this time is the install agent. There's all sorts of things that we need to set in a full installation, but we'll come back and have a look at those, particularly around networking in a short while, and interfacing, which would be the sort of life cycle elements in terms of what you need to add into here, such as when you need to create, for instance. So we'd pick up that, and we'll come back and have a look at that in just a moment. So all of these are sort of editable, and we can see those sort of hackling along a little bit later. Right. Now then, we've got a point now where we need to provide some form of networking. So let's build that in as well, I think. Well, before we do that, it's worth actually having a look at the blueprint. Now, the blueprint's got a particular name. Now, if we click on that, we can change its name. So we could say that this is my OpenStack web server and DB. What a name. Press return, of course. That's a bit of a name and a half. And we can see that renaming has been successful. What happens if we try and save it now? So the operation ended successfully, blueprint was saved successfully, and the blueprint was validated successfully. So far, so good. So what we have so far, including now those properties around flavor and image, is looking good. Excellent. Right, now it's time to move on, I think. Now before we do, I think there's a problem actually. If we, again, either the white space of host 1, go down to interfaces and alongside the create, I think you tried all of them, but if we click in here, there they are, good, they're back. Right, they weren't there originally. So what I found is that sometimes it's actually worthwhile exiting out of your composer, but then going into your VM and actually finding it. So let's just have a look at that for a second. So if we have a look and we do a PS AUX and then we grep, and what we're looking for here is server.js, and we can see that there is a server.js. There's a 5483 and 5484. So you'd find those, kill those in the num-y, sudo kill -9, and then those processor numbers, and then start it off again. And that seems to then sort of allow it to catch up. And the reason for that is because I've just loaded those in. I've just imported those in through the import method that we had earlier. And I found that it doesn't always work each time. Sometimes another little trick that might work is is essentially saving what you've done so far and then opening up another one and then sort of cycling back round again to the one that you're after. So sticking in with the one that we're in now. And the net result of that should be that when you then click on these, we're able to then pull up the proper bit that we want in order to make sure that that actually does get started. Okay, so we'll have a look at that a little bit later on. We'll come back to that. I just wanted to make sure that it was there before we started thinking about networking. So as far as what we need to do for networking is concerned, the first thing that we need to do is add in a subnet. Whoops, wrong way around. There's the network. Does help. Subnetwork. And the last thing we need is a port. There we go, great stuff. So let's connect the nodes by going into the little, looks like a speech thing at the end here, drag down through into the network, and that should create a connection. These two are going to be both on the same network for this instance, so let's drag that down to see what we've got here. We've got the two connections now down, and each one of these is then represented by these squares. So if we click on that, we can see that, and we can see the sort of source interface, target interface, and in the relationships, so we can see that this is actually connected back to host 1, whereas the other connection is indeed connected through to my database server. Excellent. Good. So that's what we can see. We're going to play with it, move it around, and there it is. So let's go down and have a look what we had down below. We had the security group. Let's add that into the equation, and let's bring in also a couple of floating IP addresses. So these will be associated with the two devices, the two servers, effectively. So that'll be nice. That'll be fine. A little bit of a wave there. So the security group, we click on there. We can see then that that has properties. Not least it has rules, so we can edit those rules. We can bring in a set of rules that are sort of suitable for what we're doing. So perhaps we need to support things like secure shell. So we'll allow that in on the remote underscore IP underscore prefix and the old everything. We're not being particularly careful here. Make sure you get your spaces in here right. So as you're looking here, that's a hyphen, then a space to the port, then you've got your colon, then it's a space to the number, then we've got two spaces here, otherwise it will just give you a format error on line 2, so two spaces to remote IP prefix colon, then a space, and move to the end. I'm going to put another value in, so move back to, and then remember to put the space back in again. This time it's port 80. Same sort of thing, perhaps a cut and paste might have been more appropriate, although that doesn't necessarily maintain formatting. Make sure you've got enough zeros in there, it's always worth double checking. Things are starting to look the same now, so perhaps we can. Let's see if we can do a copy and then a paste. See how the port numbers seem to come across, so we need to pull that back. Do it again, that seems to be fine, and then I'm just going to put two more port numbers in here because if I've got Mongo, then I need to have Mongo accessible. So Mongo needs its port numbers. So those are done. That's the rules set, seems to be happy with that. And that's the rules associated with that particular security group. Now I just move over to the hosts. Look at their config again. Remember, left click anywhere in the white space. Have a look at the network settings. So down here I've got no security groups, so let's add a security group. So from the available security groups we've got, which is security group number 13 as it happens, so add that. And as far as the IP addresses are concerned, if we add then one of the floating addresses, there are a couple to choose from this time. So we can select that. Again, X to come out. Those settings are now set, and we can see those inside that little sort of what looks like a speech bubble at the bottom there. Into my database, left click on there, down through to the network settings, and here again we've only got one security group to choose from, so we'll select that, and we've only got one floating IP address that's available, because if you remember, the other one was taken by virtue of the fact that host 1 has actually got floating IP number 14. So if we go back to the database, we want to pick out of there 15, and that's it. So we can now see that those values are in here and should be ready to rock and roll. So if we have a look inside here, then we should see within that side, which is the my database side, we've got security group 13 and floating IP 15, and on the other side we've got floating IP 14 and we've got security group 13 again. So the rules in security group 13 will apply to both of those devices, which is perfectly fine. In a common sort of environment, that would be fine, wouldn't it? So let's have a look and see what that looks like in Tosca now. So as far as the source is concerned, so I'm going to wait for that. Let's go back again. So let's have a look. See, there was a rule error that seems to have caused us a problem there. Let's have a look again at the source, see what's happening now. So the source doesn't like something. So based on what we've done so far, then we need to go back. So we can see here it's part of the rule settings. Now, I know what it is. At least I suspect I know what it is. So into the security group, down through into the ports. It's probably these last two. So let's just remove those just to see. I can't see any other errors within that. And done. And that should now be okay. So if we go into source, we should see the source coming through okay. It doesn't want to happen at this moment in time. It still says it's got a problem with those rules. So let's take them out altogether. I'll go back and format those in a moment. So let's see. This is one way to do this would be to try and save, and then you'll actually see whether you've got any errors. So this is just sort of troubleshooting a little bit with regards to finding this information. Nope, it doesn't want to do that. It's having a problem with those rules. And if we do a save now, remember the save was okay before, we've now got an error, a full-blown error. It doesn't like that at all. So I'm going to go into host 1. I'm going to go down to network, and I'm going to remove that security group. I'm going to go into the other host, that is my database, and I'm going to remove that security group. Okay, and now we're going to the source. It still doesn't like it, so let's have a look. Yeah, it's having a bit of a problem there. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of that altogether. So just click on it, delete it, yes to that. Job's done. Right, okay, let's see what we've got in terms of no, it still seems to think that there's an artifact there that is those rules. Okay, so we have a slight problem here, and we'll go back and address that. So what we're going to do is we're going to come and, because we can't save, so if we say save and continue, what we find is it's not going to work. So discard changes. Let's see if that drops out. And we'll get that back on in just a second. Right, problem there was that actually it had crashed. So it didn't like that at all. Now I'm just going to pull this back up as I've luckily I'd saved as much as possible. I've now put everything back in, including my Mongo stuff, because that does work, or should work. I don't see why not. Now this is something I hadn't put in so far, which was the description. It'll just barely ache if you don't put that in. So if I now save that, so we can see that that's good. We need the second stage. To be honest, there we go. The operation ended successfully. Blueprint was validated. Good, as before. Now you can see that I've put the two floating IP addresses back into their hosts. Security groups. Let's go into host 1, down to network. So I put the floating IP address of 14 in there, but I haven't put the security group back on. This is where it went horribly wrong before. So out of the security groups, we've only got one that we can select. So that's done. Now again, hitting save again proves that it's correctly formatted and successful in terms of being saved. So this adding the same security group to the other host, because we're talking about obviously the same security settings, should be fine. Again, let's see if that's all and dandy. Good. So that means if anything does crash now, we can get back to that point, which is a good sort of lesson in itself. So we've now got these in place. We can see that the Tosca is building up quite substantially now. We can see right the way down here, we've got our security groups. I haven't got any inputs or outputs as yet, but I'll put some of those in as well, just so we can see what they look like. But we can see all the way down from the node templates down there. You know, this is quite a substantial build as far as Tosca is concerned. Okay, so good. The rules seem to be set, and everything so far seems to be okay. So if we have a look at the server and the likes, we should be able to see, there's the host one, look. Coming down through, we can see the relationships now. Connected to database, server, it's connected to that network, it's connected to that floating IP address, and it's connected to that security group. So it's all sort of making sense. Those are the two flavors that we put in, but we can actually have that as a user input instead. So I've set these sort of static values. They could be my default values, and I'll show you how that's done in just a second. So it's starting to look pretty tasty as far as the configuration is concerned. One little useful feature before we go on is this idea of grouping. So click the group tab button over here, so the select several. So drag over and select those, and they then effectively become one of my groups. So just do that again, so that there it is. So pull that across. Select them again. Come on, do your job properly. If I press the right buttons, it would help. And then right on the right hand side, click, and there's my first group, and then drag along, come back to the right hand side, click, and that's the second group. There we go. And what we can do is we can edit groups, and we can actually effectively delete groups as a whole, rather than having to say delete the individual elements. So these are the sorts of things that you can do once they are grouped. So we can see that inside the source if we wish to, but we'll see that a little bit later. One of the things we talked about earlier was the idea of inputs and outputs. So inputs would be things like, you know, setting certain values, making requests really of users to set those values. Users could be applications, of course, and then or setting default values as well to run alongside those, and that's where we can see the default option here. So what we're going to do is add in some inputs. So the input value would be flavor, for instance, and then we could say that's a particular flavor that I've actually got you know, available to me. So the flavor name, so you know, mix 10G1 CPU flavor, whatever name you want to put into that, to be honest with you. And then we can put a default value in. It could just be pure selection. So the default value would be one of those flavor IDs, like the one we got from OpenStack before. And then we can let users actually put some in as well. So we put it into a string format, so we'll add that. And we could then add another one, which would be things like the image. So if we take that now, image. So this is going to be my sort of trusty, oops, I can't spell trusty, image. Again, I'll probably put a little bit more detail in that, and then of course we'll go back into OpenStack, get the image number, type that into here, probably more like a cut and a paste as I've just done, and then again allow people to input that as a string, and away we go. So those two flavors, those two elements, the flavor and the image, are now available as inputs. So if we go and have a look across at the source, we'll be able to see those detailed in here. So we can see those nicely sort of placed here right at the top. Just after imports, there's your inputs. Okay, so we've put into those those particular flavor and image. Okay, so further to that is down here, if there were, and there don't seem to be any, there'd be some outputs if we defined those. So referring back to inputs and outputs. So down here what we could do is look at the application servers IP address. And we could put a description here, which is pretty descriptive in its own right. And then we could come in and pick out of here the, should do that properly. We'll do that again this time, shall we? So the application server, be that brief this time. This is IP address, so in here, so we need to get the attribute. So we're looking for the attribute associated with the floating IP address. So we can see in here there's a range of those, looking at the host 1 server, external resources and so on. So we scroll down until we can see the floating IP address, which is probably one of these values down here. So we can see that, get that back again. We can see that what we've got down the bottom here is things associated with the security groups. And then we can see here we've got these other security groups, the floating IP addresses that we can see down here as well. So 14 or 15, of course, being the appropriate one that we are looking for. So looking at this down here, so we can see that we're looking for, if we're looking against 14, there it is, the new floating IP 14 floating IP. That's the beastie that we're after. So we can edit that just to make sure. Yep, so we've got the comma floating IP. This needs some slight modification. So just tuck in the middle of there and put an underscore, move to the end and put in address. So all of these things we'll sort of find out a little bit more about as we go along. So that's set out that. Let's add it in before we forget, which is usually the thing that I do, as you've noticed. And then if we go back into source, not only have we got the inputs, but we should also have, right the way down here, there's an output look. Yep, associated with that. So if we come back into the topology, one of the other things that we can do is if we go into the host, remember we had these flavors set here and the image set, so we had that set, but now we've got the input attribute, so let's use that instead. So let's go in and change the flavor here, and instead of having it set, let's go in for get input, and we'll pick out get input flavor, of course, and then for image we're going to do the same thing, so get input and image. Job done. Right, there's only one other thing that we need to change in here, and that's the cloudify agent. So if we go in and set that to user, and it's probably CentOS, but in my case I'm Ubuntu, I like to keep it that way. So that's done. I think we're there. Okay. And of course we'd need to do the same sort of thing with the database, because of course that's going to require its particular flavor and the likes, unless of course we set that statically. Very good. So if we have a look to see if we can save that, that's good. Wait for the next bit. That's even better. Excellent. So the blueprint is validated, and therefore at this point we could consider starting to think about uploading that. But we haven't finished yet, because we haven't finished with the host with regards to their interfaces. And this is specifically around about, you know, how we go about configuring them, how about we go about creating them. You're thinking about the life cycle of these particular servers, and we've got things to stop them. We've got access to an advanced message queue, so that would be something probably like in the case of OpenStack, like a rabbit type thing, but it could be others. So we've got the create one here and here as well. So there's the node, and then its ability to communicate sort of management style out using those settings. So when we go into these, then we should be able to open up and see then the OpenStack varieties that we have in here. So you can see the sort of stuff that we've got here. We've already got against Cinder, if it was if we were talking about a block storage device. We've got Glance, which is where the images of course reside. We come down through into Keystone, which is for security, Neutron, which is the networking. So as we come down all the way through there, so router create, router update, there's a whole range of those. Then we get into the Nova stuff, so this is where we're probably sort of looking now. So we're looking at the Nova plugin for floating IP, key pairs, very important. Server start, so where we're at this moment in time. Perhaps that's the bit that we need to put in here. And then we got the ability to stop and delete. So these are the sorts of things that we can add into the equation, and they would then feature as part of the interfaces associated with host 1. So as we come down through and we look at host 1, we look at its relationships, we look at the flavor, so it's a get input flavor, image, get the image. There is a default setting for that, of course. And then we come down through, we can see the interfaces is starting to open up, whereby we've got the configure now added to this, and the configure is to use this OpenStack Nova plugin server start. Well, that's correct or not at this moment in time is a bit mute because I'm not going to fully deploy this yet on OpenStack. We're just sort of going through the motions, if you like, with regards to getting these bits set. So that's starting to look sort of fairly tasty as far as the configuration is concerned, and there's a little bit more work to do. Of course, we need to refine what's actually going on in here in terms of actually getting the correct images. We've got to refine in terms of what we're going to build in here in terms of the life cycle, so which elements are we going to link these to. You could bring in your own scripts, so you could pull your own scripts in and then use those as part of the configuration as well. But I think that's a good start. It also gives us a good link into Tosca. So if you get this and then you copy that out, print it, look through it, you'll be able to highlight the various sections within there. So first sections would be things like the inputs that we can see. So we can see that for flavor and image. Then we go into the node templates. That's a fairly big section because of course that will be for host 1. That's the actual main server, if you like, with its web server sitting on top. And then we've got the database with its database sitting on top. Then we get down through into sort of, this is all within the sort of node template stuff still. So we've got the subnets, and then we've got the relationships with those, the port, the floating IP addresses, the security group rules. Then we break out into groups. This is where we saw them being grouped together. And then we saw the outputs. Of course, the outputs, as we saw here, was giving us the server IP address out as a valid output from this Tosca script. So the outputs, typically it could be the server IP address like we've just done. It could be other sort of static resources, especially as we consider that this is now coming through the full sort of runtime cycle. So we should be able to pick up sort of other elements within that runtime as well. So I think that's enough for today as far as this is concerned. So happy hunting, and so hope you don't get as many troubles. But I've tried to put a couple of those troubles in here as well so that you can fix your way through those as you go. Okay, so again, happy hunting, and hopefully all goes well. Of course, the next stage after this, and of course remembering that we have saved this and it's been successful and it's save. I should never preempt anything, should you? Could always go horribly wrong. So we've now got that. We could now consider uploading that, assuming of course we've now configured your Cloudify manager. So that's really the sort of next step. Establish a Cloudify manager. I'm actually going to do that on a Windows environment using an Oracle VirtualBox and using Vagrant. That's pretty much following the sort of classic Cloudify first time installation of a Cloudify manager. And what it'll also do, it'll mean that my composer and my manager are actually sitting on two different environments, because of course my composer is on Ubuntu, well it's in a Linux environment, and I'm going to put my Cloudify manager on Windows. So there we go. So speak to you again. Bye for now.